There we go. So we're recording now, friends. Friends, it's my pleasure and my delight to introduce to you Sean Hockey. Correct, Sean?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And Sean's joining us this morning from the UK, so it's actually nighttime where he's at, but he's been kind enough to be with us this morning. So Sean, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself and tell us why you would agree to meet with this crazy group of people.
Well, thanks very much. Tom convinced me, so thanks, Tom, and thanks, Anna, for bringing me here to and opening up this space to have this conversation with you. I've worked a long time with ecumenical groups, so the Lutheran World Federation, World Council of Churches, the ACT Alliance, and I've worked in all over the world. A lot of it has been about communications and journalism. And so this recent experience accompanying the migrant caravan was very powerful. It was picked up by a lot of media. And so I've been asked to share that with you. I'm very happy to do that. I'm glad that there's some interest in it.
So
do you want me to launch into it? Or?
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about what other kinds of similar experiences you've had where you've traveled with people or done some photo work or anything like that, and kind of what your heart and passion is around this.
Yeah, I've worked for about 12 years in Central America, mainly El Salvador. That was the bulk of it, but also a couple of years in Honduras, 3 years in Nicaragua, little bits in Guatemala. I also spent a year in Peru, and it's all of that work in some way or another has been accompanying people. Fairly early on, I lost any hope of being able to change things significantly, but it's accompanying people. So I recently spent a few months in Honduras, and I did a book. I'm going to plug my book right now. It's called The Real Face of Jesus. And it's a series of interviews and portraits of people who are called Jesus. So men and women, there's lots of women called Maria de Jesus or Veronica de Jesus or something. So I've tried to sort of balance that there. And it's stories about the situation in Honduras at the moment. And just about 2 or 3 days after I published the book, after it came off the press, then everybody was walking out of Honduras in this exodus. Mm-hmm. So I felt connected to it immediately because I'd only really just left Honduras, and I knew people who were on the caravan, people from communities. Oh, that's my light gone. So we were plunged into darkness. I brought out a studio light so I didn't look so dark, but you'll have to put up with me being dark. So, yeah, when they set off, I left. I was in the UK at the time, and I went down to the Mexico-Guatemala border. They were just reaching that border. So that's where I picked up with them. And the total journey that they did from San Pedro Sula to Tijuana is 4,900 kilometers. It's a real long march. And I went quite a long way with them. So it was about 4,000 kilometers, I suppose, from the southern border right up to Tijuana. A lot of that was walking. A lot of that was hitchhiking, sitting on the backs of, flatbed trucks and pickup trucks and that sort of thing. And yeah, it was a long trip. It took over a month. My part of it took over a month, so some people were even longer on that. And of course, it's an ongoing situation. There's lots of people still camped in Tijuana in poor conditions without really knowing what their future is going to be. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit, Sean, before we watch the video, which I think you want to share with everybody here in a bit, could you tell us a little bit about why people are leaving their homes headed for the border? What were the stories that you heard?
Yeah. So the motors of migration is a big issue in Central America all the time. The migrant caravan brought attention to it, but this has been going on for a long time. There's, I don't know, and it's not just the northern triangle of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, but it's Mexico as well. There were Mexicans on the caravan going from southern Mexico.
Right.
And I don't know how many Mexicans or Central Americans there are in the US, but I understand it's 35 million plus Mexicans. Right. I know at least 2 million Salvadorians there. So this has been, this isn't a new thing. You know this.
Right.
And you were saying the 75% population of Latinos in California, which is, that's really, really high. So you're fully aware of this and how people go up. Normally people go up with a coyote, a trafficker.
Okay.
And typically they will pay a trafficker $4,000, $5,000, maybe $6,000, $7,000. And the deal will be the trafficker will get them will give them 3 attempts to get into the US. So if they don't get in on the first attempt and they get deported, they'll give them another go and so on. But it's a very high price to pay. And when people pay that, they know that the coyotes are criminals.
Right.
And the way that they pay their safe passage with groups of migrants, they pay their safe passage across Sinaloa or Tamaulipas or very dangerous states. They pay criminal organizations for security. And the way they pay is not with money, but they hand over the young women. So people know what the risks are. And lots of men are also taken into slavery to work in agriculture or construction or something, but they're taken as slaves. And lots of people just don't make it. They call Mexico a graveyard of migrants. There's an organization of a church-based organization that takes the mothers of migrants on a pilgrimage across Mexico every year. We met them during the caravan. And they all carry pictures of their children who have just disappeared on the journey. So they're taking very significant risks. And people know that when they pay this huge sum of money for them to the traffickers, that they may not get there. So when the caravan set off, it started off very small, but lots of people who didn't even have money to pay a trafficker saw this as an opportunity, firstly, to not pay a coyote, but secondly, it's safer. If you travel with a group of 10,000 people, at times I'm fairly certain that there were closer to 15,000 people. There's safety in numbers. And a few people died on the trip, but not so many as you'd expect. Normally the risks were significantly lower, the costs were much lower. But why do people want to go is the other big question. So there's a combination of factors. Climate change is a huge thing. I think in California you should be aware already that this is a reality.
Yes.
Some people in Washington, they're taking their time to catch up on understanding this, but it's a really serious problem. In south of Honduras, there's a dry corridor, they call it, where lots of farmers, one of the Jesuses in my book is a farmer from that area, hasn't had a harvest for 10 years. So lots of people haven't had a real harvest for 10 years. Many more haven't had a harvest for 5 years or 3 years, but this is a growing area of prolonged drought. And the rain there's altered patterns of rainfall. So sometimes the rain comes, but it's already too late. The plants have died, and you get 6 months rain in 1 day or 2 days, and it washes away the topsoil. So you've got these areas where they're not even farmers anymore. They're just very poor people living in a rural area without a means to sustain themselves. And for the young people in those areas, what's their view of the future?
Right.
Young people of 20 who've never seen a harvest.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy for criminal organizations, for them to be tempted to go towards criminal activity to sustain themselves, to feed off others who do have a bit of who have the resources to sustain themselves. But the picture in living in those communities is anybody who's surviving is surviving with remittances from the US. So lots of people, they just think, well, this is madness, I can't carry on, and they'll leave. Typically the younger, stronger people will leave, and maybe they'll bring other people after them, maybe their own children, maybe a man will go and then bring his wife and his children, even his parents. But when you travel around the south of Honduras, the only people who are prosperous are people who've had some connection with the US. So the dream, there's a sort of, it's partly illusion, partly a true perception, is if you get up to the US, you work for 10 years, 15 years, you save a bit of money, you come back, you build a house, you might buy a pickup truck and be able to survive, or a taxi or something. You might be able to survive in a different way, because you're not going to be able to survive as a farmer anymore. So climate change is a big motor. Then you've got, and these things are all sort of interrelated. So climate change is pushing people towards the cities. And in the cities, if you come from a rural area and you go to the marginal areas of a city, you're the poorest of the poor. You're living in really awful conditions, perhaps without running water, perhaps without electricity, perhaps you're living in very inadequate shelter, shacks. And in those areas, the level of violence is phenomenal. Honduras has been the top of the world in violent crime. San Pedro Sula has been the most violent city in the world outside of a war zone. So people are moving into that area, and as soon as they get there, they think, this is unacceptable. The children are being brought into criminal organizations with really extreme methods of recruitment. So they'll say to a 12-year-old boy, either you join the gang or we'll kill your mother today. And they're not joking. So lots of parents told me on the caravan, they were just escaping this recruitment. They didn't want their children to be part of organized crime.
Yeah.
That's a reality. It's a sort of, in some areas it's so bad that the young women sort of expect to be abused sexually. They expect to be raped. So lots of people are also escaping with their children. They don't care. They know they're going to a hostile, closed border. They know that the journey is dangerous. They know that they'll suffer along the way. They have to walk and hitchhike for nearly 5,000 kilometers. It's preferable to staying where they are. So these are some of the motors. The violence, there's gang-related violence, but there's also, lots of people were writing to me during the caravan saying, why don't these people stay at home and change their government? Well, first of all, change your own.
Right.
Change your own. The government, in 9 years ago, there was a military coup against Mel Zelaya, and that set the stage for the deconstruction of democracy, of the justice system. You have an illegal government that requires impunity to remain in power. So they've completely deconstructed the justice system. That sets the stage for the whole country to be run by criminals.
Yeah.
So they've recently arrested, at Miami airport, they arrested the president's brother, Tony Hernandez, for being a major player in drug trafficking. Everybody's known this. The US has known this for a long time, but for some reason they've just started to play around with them. But Tony Hernandez had his own submarine. He's got his own brand of cocaine.
Wow.
So a submarine for trafficking, not for journeys. I mean, there's no legitimate personal use of a submarine, is there? So we're talking about a completely delinquent government who, the health service, they've robbed everything out of the health service. They made a deal with pharmaceutical companies to make tablets, pills made of flour to replace all of the cancer medicine, for example, so that they could rob the cancer medicine money. And they just gave the cancer patients tablets made of flour. So this is the moral level of the government. Trump recently said he was going to withdraw funding from the government of Honduras. He won't do that, but it would be amusing because most of that money goes to military, to supporting the military who are repressing all legitimate protests. The UK has contributed significantly to this as well. They've got a surveillance system which they can read every message you send on your mobile phone in the country. So they can track down all of the activists who are against the government. And if you're significant in your activism, you'll just be murdered. So 22 journalists have recently, and this is my field, journalism, 22 journalists have recently been murdered. If you destroy journalism like that, and the New York Times recently published a piece that said 95% of the journalists in the country are paid off. They're tarifals. They receive a tariff. At the end of the month, they get an envelope. So for an esteemed journal to risk saying that, that's a significant statement. Right. And I know this is true. I'm very critical of the press and of fellow journalists there. Some have confided in me that they don't want to receive it, but what alternative do they have? You're going to take the envelope, or you're not going to take the envelope? Not taking the envelope is a very, very dangerous thing. So there's only one TV station which they've tried their best to close down. It's called UNITV, which is critical of the government. The lead journalist on that, Cesar Silva, was captured and tortured for 2 days. Less than a month ago, Giovanni Sierra was just shot. He survived it, but so this is what you're risking. You will be killed. If they can't get you to shut up some other way, they'll just kill you. So you deconstruct the justice system, you deconstruct journalism. You don't really have, and anybody who gets involved in activism against the government, just picked off. They've been killing students, lots and lots of students. The students are the most, they haven't got kids yet, they haven't got a family or whatever. They've got less responsibilities. They are angry that their future has been taken away from them. So there's lots of students being killed. So you've got these. Violence is not just the gangs, it's the government.
Right.
So people are escaping, and then you've got poverty, hunger. Honduras is one of the poorest countries in the world. When I first went to Honduras 20-something years ago, I worked with there's 8 indigenous nations in the country. I worked with one of them, the Chortis. 50% of their children were dying before the age of 5.
Oh my God.
And that's a figure that you couldn't even find that in the famines of Ethiopia. It's 50% of the children were dying. That's improved recently, but those are still, there's an extractivist, they call it an extractivist economic model, where the government are giving concessions on indigenous land. So the land that the indigenous people have been surviving on, just in the last few days, I've seen horrific images coming out from the Tolobang people, who they're giving out concessions, logging concessions, mining concessions, concessions to commercial agriculture outfits on Tolobang land, which has always been Tolobang land. And then anybody who protests is either murdered, and I recently attended the funeral of one of the Tolobang leaders who was just murdered. If you accept the leadership role in the Tolobang people, you know you're going to be killed. There's been 14 murders recently of Tolobang leaders. So each one who accepts this role, as one is killed and another one takes their place, they know what's coming. So that's what people are running away from. It's the poverty is that local business has been destroyed to a great extent. The government has given this incredible deal to American franchises, to international franchises, that they don't have to pay tax. So when you drive into a city like San Pedro Sula, every fast food outlet that you've ever seen in the US, they're there, lots of them.
Wow.
And they're not paying taxes. So how can a Honduran company compete against a franchise that's not paying tax? You can't do that. So it's destroyed. I mean, these are really treacherous things that they've done to their own people. So there's a number of things that contribute to extreme poverty, and there's violence from gangs, there's violence from the government, and there's climate change behind all of that, and they're sort of linked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's why people are leaving.
Thank you, Sean. One more thing before we watch the video. One of the things that you and I talked about this morning was, being on the road with this group of folks for 4 weeks, the toll that it has taken on you. Would you be willing to share with the group a little bit about that?
Yeah, I suppose. Actually, I met an English friend who decided, having seen some of the work that I was doing, he decided he'd go out, and I saw him last night, and he's fairly sort of emotionally devastated by this. He went out and set up a kitchen in Tijuana for a couple of weeks and was feeding 500 people every night. I find that what really gets me is that people are still hopeful, and there is absolutely no reason at all to be hopeful. Right. There's no reason. I always differentiate between hope and optimism normally, but there's no reason to be optimistic about this, because any analysis of the facts will show them that it's not looking good. I don't know how many children are detained at the moment. You've said that you've been to visit detention centres, but I read that it was up to 12,000 children separated from their parents in detention. Yeah. Well, so what's the best they can hope for is that they'll have their children taken away from them. And they must know this. They must know it, and yet they're still cheerful. So, yeah, I won't go into it too much because I'll crack up. But there were lots of I noticed this amongst people who'd never met each other before, and they'd be traveling together, and it was rough going. So often we'd leave 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 1 o'clock in the morning, because it was very hot in the south. It's 30. I don't know this in Fahrenheit. You only operate in imperial units, but 38 Fahrenheit, 39 Fahrenheit, it is unbearable temperature. And the tarmac of the road was 50. So it was it would cook your feet, and people's feet were really in a terrible condition. They were exploding. And so we'd set off very early in the morning, walking 10,000 people together in the dark. It's a very powerful experience, a sort of primal experience. I won't go into it too much. I will crack up over this, but people forge very strong, close friendships in those situations, and there'd be these small groups. Everybody be in a group with someone, and they would be looking after each other. And so there might only be one plate of food, but they would share one plate of food. They might all sleep under one piece of plastic in the street or something. But there's these, they'll be friends forever. They're very, very close friendships. And of course, I was part of that. And I met a lot of people. I knew people already from Honduras. I was meeting people in the caravan who I'd already met in different situations. Journalists escaping from death threats. I mentioned UNITV, the TV channel, the cameraman. There was just this one TV channel turned up. They've done everything to close them down. They've taken away their license. They turn off their electricity. They turn off their internet and everything, but they still managed to function. And they were out filming in in southern Mexico. And when they went back, the cameraman handed back the camera and said, "I'm staying."
Wow.
He went with the caravan because his life is in threat. And sure enough, Giovanni Sierra went back and they shot him. So it's, and there was another journalist I met who I thought was reporting. And he said, "No, I'm on the caravan." And the LGBT community, there were about 80 of them. They're a very persecuted group in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. So that was a tight, scared group of people leaving. I think they've got a fairly good chance that their case is very, very clear. The trouble for lots of people is when they get to if they go over the border and they want refugee status, they have to prove that their lives are in threat.
Right.
Well, there's more people being killed in Honduras recently than there were killed during the war in El Salvador. So it's a real humanitarian crisis, but because it's not recognized, for example, by the UN as a humanitarian crisis, there's no automatic recognition of them as refugees. And they have to prove that their life is in threat to get refugee status. Now, I met one guy who they shot his 10-year-old son in the head. 2 weeks later, they raped his 15-year-old daughter. And he was with his other son. And I said, "Did you report it while you were there?" And he said, "Well, who am I going to report it to? The people who did it were linked to the police. Why would I report it? What's the point?" Well, the point is, if you get to your interview in the US and you don't have a piece of paper to show that this has happened, they won't believe you and they'll send you back. So getting some sort of documentation of the things that are happening is really important for your legal case if you want to apply for asylum. Yeah. Shall we watch the video?
Yeah, let's do that. Before we do the video, does anybody have a question for Sean? And if you do, take yourself off mute. Okay, seeing none. Sean, thank you for sharing all of that with us. I know it can be difficult to recount some of that experience.
I stopped myself there, but anyway.
All right. So why don't you show us the video?
Okay, let me see if this is possible. Share. And these are some things that all of the footage is footage that I shot during the caravan, and with an American singer who's at seminary in the US. We did this little. The World Council of Churches, their message for Christmas is about Jesus fleeing from a violent and jealous king. Right. There's various little stabs in there that I think may be directed at Trump. I don't know, but what they're saying is that Jesus and his family, they were refugees. Yeah. They were fleeing. So that's what this video is about. If I can find it, let's share.
There we go.
Okay, let's see if this works. Hopefully it will work. My internet connection isn't brilliant. Here we go.
Atiéndeme, Señor. Respóndeme, pues pobre soy, estoy necesitado. Resérvame la vida, pues te soy fiel. Tú eres mi Dios, y en ti confío. As Christmas approaches, we marvel at the singular act by which God has graced and elevated our human condition through the incarnation of Jesus. He was born of a poor family, caught in treacherous circumstances in a dangerous world. heartless empire loomed around him, while a jealous king sought his life, prompting his family to flee with him into exile. A refugee family living in fear. Around the globe, poverty and violence have driven some 60 million people from their homes in a rootless, desperate search for safety, dignity, and well-being. They risk their lives in hopes of saving them, yet often they are met with suspicion, hostility, or even racism and exploitation. The glad tidings of God's becoming human have lifted the human prospect, forging us into one humanity, beloved of God and bound in solidarity to protect the vulnerable, heal the wounded, and welcome the refugee with open arms and grateful hearts. May the wonder and joy of God's incarnation in Jesus inspire hope in our hearts, love in our deeds, and a heedless solidarity with all humanity. Padécete, Señor, de mí, que a ti clamo todo el día. Reconforta el espíritu de tu siervo, que a ti, Señor, elevo mi alma.
So, sort of a bit of a view of what was happening and what it looked like. There were, it was huge numbers of people, which they spread out and they were split up, and there were other caravans that followed. So you get a bit of a feel for the thing, and I really like the message and the written message. It's worth looking up on the World Council of Churches website. It's really spot on, because I mean this is just a small group of people compared. I was comparing notes with a friend journalist from South Sudan, works for Catholic radio, and she said, well, 10,000, 15,000, that's nothing. We get 100,000, 200,000 people moving together, more. So across the world, it's 60 million people at the moment who are moving around, that's leaving everything behind to save their lives. Yeah, it's a pretty big challenge. And we've got things like Yemen, where there's about 10 million people about to starve to death. We know that, and we're not doing anything about it. So it's the plight of different people around the world. I'm very happy that the caravan has brought the plight of Central Americans to the forefront for people to consider, and it's been very visible. But it's interesting too to consider. There's various analyses of why. Why is it so prominent who started this off, and there is there's a thick plot to consider there, because really who benefited from that the most was, in the midterm elections, was Trump. And there is evidence that there was money came in to get that thing started. All the conditions are there for people to leave in en masse, you know.
Right.
But there was a push there. And where did that come from? Well, who benefited from it? Yeah.
So friends, I want to open us up for some conversation. I'd love to hear from our participants at home, your thoughts and reflections on what Sean has shared with us, the video. Were there images that stood out to you?
This is Lee, and I had seen the video from the message you had sent out, Ken and Anna. And Sean, I really appreciate your sharing. I guess the thing that stands out for me is not necessarily the video, because I guess it is worse than I imagined, but just your stories are what are hitting me. And I plan to go back to my church after Christmas and share this video and suggest that they watch the recording. I just want to thank you for sharing. I can see why you would get broken up. I'm broken up, and I appreciate you doing this.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks.
And thanks, Anna, for arranging it.
Hi, Sean. This is Bill Shreve. I also appreciate you doing this for us. I visited El Salvador last year for Christosol's Global School. Christosol is working to try to reestablish law and order in El Salvador and the rule of law with some success. And just a year ago, they got asked by USAID to go into Guatemala and Honduras to try to help the other parts of the triangle. Your stories about the situation with the government there in Honduras are really appalling. I don't know how they'll even get started. As a matter of fact, the friends that I made on that trip, I'm now worried that if they do make a good start to try to reestablish elements of a justice system, that they will be murdered. It's your tale is just so terrible. But I mean, ultimately, the solution for our country has to be to improve conditions at home so people can stay there through a combination of aid to overcome the climate change issues and just generally finding elements within the population that you can work with to rebuild a stable society. I mean, in El Salvador, it's been a long time since their revolution, and it's taken a long time to get even the beginnings of it. But they're now starting to get some of the war crimes prosecuted, and have had some very good places where the court has stood up to those who have been in power and have been dominating the politics. So they have hope. But even in a population with hope, they ran a survey covering all elements of the population, rich and very poor, or rich on their scale, nothing on our scale. And 50% of the people would like to leave El Salvador. I imagine in Honduras, the number would be much, much greater.
Well, I've seen a study that says 70%. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thank you for your story. I wish we had, we will work to publicize it. There's already a lot of work going on in the churches here. Our bishops in the state of California, I'm from California, got together and issued a statement on sanctuary and asylum seekers, asking all Episcopalians in the state to bond together to try to pressure the government to at least put more people, so that the people who are waiting for asylum interviews in Tijuana and other places. Well, Tijuana is the California border place. That will be given a chance to do it. It was a 45-day wait for an interview before the caravan arrived. I don't know how many people have actually applied for interviews, so I don't know the actual wait time, but it's got to be many months. And the conditions in those centers they're in are not good. They're not as good as what you were showing on the road there. So it's a terrible situation, but know that a lot of us are aware of it and doing what we can. There are churches in San Diego helping those who do get allowed in to have a safe time until their court case comes up in this country. So there's a limit we can do without changing the law, and that's a slow process in Washington.
Is Bishop Mark Andrews one of your guys?
Yes, he is.
He is. I was with him last week in Poland, actually, in the UN climate change conference. He's been following that for a long time. I keep on bumping into him. Yeah, he's a good guy. So you're in good hands.
Yes, we have 6 good bishops, and they're very much trying to get the flock to rally around this cause. I actually am part of a team that's trying to combine the 6 dioceses together so that all Episcopalians in the state can work together. It's a big state, so that's quite a lot of people. It's wonderful to work with these people. Then we picked off the first issue. There are many issues in California to deal with, including climate change, but the first one we're working on is immigration. So, thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Yeah.
Sean, we finally see each other face to face. This is great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this and
it's been a pleasure.
Remarkable experiences you've had, and we've benefited and have been sharing from your Facebook page images over the course of your journey. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the child that was born along the way that you captured so beautifully.
Yeah, so there were about 30 or 40 pregnant women walking, and it was tough. So I met this woman called Suyapa. Suyapa is the patron saint of Honduras. It's sort of, a symbolic name, and she was very heavily pregnant and walking long distances each day. And we got to a place called Suchitan in Oaxaca, and her waters broke. And so we took her to the hospital. The hospital refused her. It was a state hospital, refused her treatment. And so we took her to a private hospital. And she had, it was a long labor. The baby was born, and they decided to call the baby Alison Guadalupe being the patron saint of Mexico. And the Latin American, typically, the way they name children is the first name is to represent somebody in your family, and the second name would be the name that you'd actually use. So the baby's known as Guadalupe. So enormously symbolic for the Mexicans. She was the first. That was the first baby who was born. And actually, they put her picture, the picture of the baby, on the Christmas card for the World Council of Churches, which was nice. You can't get much more Christmassy than that in terms of symbolism, I think. That family, terrible rural poverty. Just escaping, a real threat of. In that particular area, there's such hunger that I've seen mothers not feed their children. I've seen mothers not feed their baby with breast milk in order to survive. So that's the level of poverty. Is what happens when there's not enough food for a family. Some really brutal decisions have to be made inside a family over, okay, who are we betting on here? Who's going to survive? And if the parents don't survive, nobody can survive. So that's the level of poverty that they were escaping. pretty brutal. Several other mothers have, along the way have had babies. You know, it's amid all of this to see the hope of new life is a special thing. So it was moving to see Guadalupe appear on the scene. Yeah.
Sean, this is Lynn Zender in Northern California, and I have a quick question. Where would I find the link for the video if I wanted to forward that church greeting to persons?
Yeah, thanks. Anna, can you handle that? You know the group. I think you're in communication.
Yeah, so Lynn will make sure that gets sent out to everybody who is on this call.
Thank you very much.
Certainly. Speaking Nancy.
Sean, the thing on your information and reflection that just has grabbed me and won't let go is your statement that there's no reason for hope. And so, you know, then you talked a bit about optimism, but there's no reason for hope. So where do we go then from here? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. I know I've never said this before, that there's no reason for hope. And it's a fairly brutal thing to say. But several people have asked me recently, you know, how do you keep your hope up? And I realized actually I don't have any, you know, there is a difference between hope and optimism. You can have no reason to be optimistic. There's no practical reason to think that things are going to turn out great. But you can still be hopeful. It's just you know, it might be a thing of faith. It might be a thing of just a positive disposition to life. I don't know. But where do we go? I don't know. I'm feeling, you know, there's 10 million people about to starve to death in Yemen. We don't care enough about that. We don't care enough about the plight of other human beings to actually get up and do something about it. We're not doing anything about it. So where do we go? I don't know. Where's this going to? Climate change. We don't care enough about it. The impact of this is absolutely massive. You know, California's already sharing some of the impact of this, but around the world, this is going to affect millions of people, and we are just beginning to see that, you know, this is just the beginning of it. Massive droughts, massive floods, food insecurity, the failure of agriculture, the millions of people that we're seeing moving around the world out of the Middle East, out of Central America. It's just the beginning. This is, it's going to be absolutely huge. So I think generally, I just find it hard to reconcile the plight of a child in Yemen who is going to starve to death for no reason. I'm sitting here, it's Christmas in England, you know, there's a vulgar abundance of everything. There's gluttony, you know, and I just can't see how this can all be reconciled happily in the end. Is there any hope for humanity when we live like this? Where do we go next? I don't know. I think we have to do more, much more. And those of us who feel empathy for others, and it's not everybody in the world, but we have to do more to show our solidarity with others, I think. Otherwise, you know, I'm thinking of a child in Yemen who is going to starve to death. I can't even get into Yemen to take photographs or show people what's happening there. It's almost certain death if you're trying to go in there. So what are we doing? I don't know. What hope is there for the world? I'm stuck. I don't know. It's a good question.
And defies an easy answer, but you know, as people of God, I have this sense that we don't know. It's perhaps a mystery to us, but we can't give in to an action.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah.
I mean, and I'm just, I'm thinking about my ordination charges as a deacon in the church, and it doesn't just say bring the needs and concerns of the world to the church, though we can never do that enough, but it also says to bring the hopes of the world to the church. And so, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's storytelling of the sort that you're doing and that we hopefully in turn can do is something, you know, to see what you've put together, I think is a fabulous tool for us, and we are going to use that. So maybe we don't see hope, but maybe that's only because it's a mystery and we're not fully in charge of it. I mean, that's the only place I can get to it. Maybe somebody else on this call or someone else has other thoughts, but I feel like you've given us a tool and somewhere not visible perhaps in our beliefs, there's got to be hope, visible or not. I don't know. It's that statement is going to haunt me. Your statement's going to haunt me.
I'm sorry. It's not.
No. I mean, that's good.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I don't know. I don't think you know, our hope should be disconnected from practical. You know, a practical analysis of where we're at and a practical approach to dealing with it. You know, just going to church to enjoy each other's company and sing some songs and pray together, that is not enough. You know? There's a Spanish song, no basta rezar, it's not enough to pray. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
But sure, we still have to do that too.
You know, what really strikes me is it's easy to ignore caricatures, or it's easy to hate on caricatures. It's more difficult to look people in the face and see these are real men, women, and children that are suffering through this. So thank you, Sean, for bringing this to the world and expanding that to everybody. This past week, after seeing the video, I decided to write a letter to the Modesto Beat that references this video. They're going to publish it tomorrow in the Sunday paper. And that's ways that we can spread the word to everybody, not just the people in the pews, but to people in the community, especially in the Central Valley that sees so many of these brothers and sisters suffering. So thank you for what you do.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
Okay.
I live in the desert, so I know about the heat and all of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I planned on doing, I've seen this video probably 5 times now. We have a very large coffee hour during our season, and I'm just going to put it on the screen as they sit in coffee hour and see if we get any kind of conversations. What do you think?
I think it's great. And I've been amazed at how much this has been picked up, because in the US in particular, it's a very polarized, politically polarized situation. And having a counter narrative to the official government narrative that this is, you know, this is a group of violent young men and criminals. I've heard them called men of military age, which makes it sound like a sort of invasion. And they've used the word invasion. And then to some of my most successful images, which actually that aren't in the video at all, but are of women. I did a series of photographs of women and girls and young mothers. And, you know, is this the criminal gang of military age men? Is this the invasion force that's coming? You know, No, it's ordinary people. It's families who are escaping, and they're not doing it because they want to walk for 4 or 5 weeks across Mexico in blistering heat. They don't leave everything behind for that reason. They're doing it because it's a better option to do that than to stay where they are. So I think you will get some pickup. I hope. I mean, I hope it causes a bit of a ruckus.
I kind of hope so too.
You look like a troublemaker. Yeah.
We have worked here with the immigrant population at the lower end of the valley on the east side, and attempting to get them housing as they come in for, we depend on them for picking season. So you know, we're a land of white people living in a sea of immigrants.
Yeah.
So we just need to.
It's a delicate and it's a very difficult subject. And at the same time, I don't believe that the principle is that everybody who's in trouble in Central America should have the right to go into the US. I don't think that is a logical policy either. That's going to cause a lot of trouble. There'll be a lot of displacement, particularly with, let's say, working class people, low-income working class people, and they will fear a wave of immigration. And we've got that problem here too, as well. That we've got exactly that same issue here. The solution to it is to deal with this humanitarian crisis as a humanitarian crisis, but at the same time to work on the motors of what are the motors of migration. And that's US foreign policy has got a big chunk of responsibility in that, for accepting criminal governments and reinstating recently a completely criminal government. You know, the sort of criminals have got submarines to ship drugs to the US.
Right.
How do you fix that? Well, can you fix it at the ballot box? Maybe. I don't know. I'm getting in deep trouble talking about American politics with you guys. I don't know.
No, you're not. You're in good company, brother.
I really appreciate you and work that you've done.
Thank you, Kate.
For us to feed people visually what's going on. Thank you for that.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to contribute something.
I think that the government needs to focus a little bit more on how to improve conditions in the Northern Triangle and the other parts down there. We met, when I was down in El Salvador, met with former gang members and people who had family members in the gangs. And they're recruited at age 12 to 14. They're just children. And they don't have a choice, and they end up in a situation they don't want to be in, but it's the only way they can provide food for their family if they don't have money coming in from the U.S. And many don't, particularly the poorer people, haven't gotten those young men over here to earn money and send it home. And so we've got to find ways to create economic opportunity for them within their country. And I don't know what the answer there is, but providing more support for the military so they can try to crack down on gangs with violence, and it creates the police and the military both cracking down on the civilian population caught in the middle. It's a terrible situation now, and we're not helping it. We recognize that.
Yeah. It's been great speaking to you all. What a lovely group. Thanks very much for turning up online.
Thank you, Sean. So I want to share with you all, and for those of you in San Joaquin, you're going to be hearing more about this in January when we return from holiday break. But from our last clergy conference, which Sean, we spent a fair amount of time talking about these issues at our clergy gathering. We talked about climate change and listened to the stories of Native Alaskans and people from South Africa talk about being in ground zero of climate change and how that displaces people and how that affects everything, right? All the way down to people being able to survive, right? So when you talked about people leaving the triangle because of climate change, that resonated with me, and I hope with some of you all who were at clergy conference, because that reinforces the message that we heard this week from our brothers and sisters, and listening to the story of how that's then related to violence and trafficking. Trafficking is a huge issue, particularly in San Joaquin, because we're on the corridor between LA and Sacramento and the Bay Area, where trafficking is alive and well, and we are the corridor for a lot of that trafficking coming up from the south. So these are real issues for us, and while we are not in the heart of it in the triangle, as you were, we are certainly aware of the ramifications of these movements and the violence and the climate change. So having said all of that, out of our clergy conference, one of the things that came up is that there are several of us who feel compelled to continue raising awareness and education and doing some advocacy work and helping people with legal defense for whether they come in seeking asylum as refugees or they cross the border illegally. And so you're going to be hearing more about our own pilgrimage of hope, which will leave Fresno in May 5th, and we will journey to Sacramento to arrive on the state capitol for the Day of the Immigrant in California, which is May 20th. And we're going to invite those of you who are from Northern California and DioCal and San Diego and our El Camino Real and LA, we're going to invite you to walk with us. And that may mean actual feet on the ground, and it may mean prayers and education and advocacy in your congregations. It may mean that we need to hit you up from some money to help support this adventure. Okay, so keep an ear out, keep an eye out, and you'll be hearing more about this in January. And Sean, thank you. Thank you for, even though you may not feel hope, you've inspired hope in us that we can be agents of change in our little corner of the kingdom of God.
Yeah,
so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Great group, very receptive. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you mind if I pray us out, Sean?
Please do.
Thank
Please
you.
do.
Gracious God, you came to us as an immigrant from heaven in the form of Jesus, who with his family were refugees from persecution and oppression and unjust systems. And so we ask that not only during this season, but in the season of life ahead for us as communities of faith and people of hope, that you keep that in our forefront, that you took a chance on us and now we need to respond. We need to respond to our brothers and sisters who are your face to us now. And so we bless Sean and his colleagues who are out there risking their very livelihoods and lives to tell this story. We ask your blessing on those who are still walking and waiting and hoping for something better. And we ask you to work on the hearts and minds of those who have the power and the authority to make change happen, that they may be empathetic to the plight of our brothers and sisters. And give us all courage to speak truth, even when it's really scary to do so. And so as we leave this place today, we ask your blessing on us, ask your blessing on all of those who are looking for hope in the world, and help us to be a little kinder and a little gentler with one another. All this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, so very much.
We'll be in touch, and I put at your disposition all of the images that I've got. I've got a good gallery of images. So if any of them are useful for any of your communications, very happy to contribute that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Happy Christmas, everyone.
Happy Christmas, Sean.
Happy Christmas.
See ya. Thanks.
Bye.